Hey folks, it's Uncle Jay, and I am on the phone right now with Grim from Blackfive, who is freshly back from a good long trip in Iraq, and also Bill Roggio, who obviously is there and back an awful lot. And we're going to talk about the counterinsurgency efforts in Iraq and also our global counterinsurgency efforts overall. One of the big, things that happened recently in Iraq is that Maliki has sent a delegation to Iran with evidence of Iranian involvement in a lot of the bad things going on in Iraq, and basically asking them to stop. Now, I'd like to hear both gentlemen what your thoughts are about that. Starting with you, Bill Roggio.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's been a lot of evidence for Iran's involvement in Iraq. The U.S. has captured Hezbollah commanders sent into Iran. The ESP weapons, the explosively formed projectiles, mortars, other heavy artillery rockets have been intercepted and have been seized in weapons depots. This is really no surprise from the U.S. perspective, but I think it's significant that Iraq is itself, the Iraqi government, has recognized this, and not only recognized this, is admitting it, but is now taking a direct approach with Iran to try to get them to stop. I think this is really the worst nightmare for Iran. You know, it's a country that purports to support the Iraqi Shia majority. However, it is in essence really directing most of its munitions and its efforts to kill the Shia, because most of these weapons that are going off are going off in Sadr City, or with mortars falling short into Shia neighborhoods, and they're also being directed at Iraqi political leaders in the center-south area, and everything from Basra up until Baghdad. So, it is highly significant that Iraq is addressing this issue, and I think Iran has a lot to worry about with this.
Well, now, Grim, what are your thoughts? You've been there, obviously, for a considerable amount of time over the past year. What do you think of Sadr's influence and the overall Iranian question as it faces the Maliki government these days?
Well, I'd like to start with an affirmation of what Bill said about these weapons being more dangerous to the Shiites than they are to anybody else. When I was there, we had some rocket attacks on Camp Victory that were coming out of Baghdad University, the peninsula there. And, these guys, I don't know what kind of training they're getting from Iran, but it must not really entail a very great success in terms of the accuracy of their rockets, because they mostly end up killing innocent people. They don't really seem to have any capacity to actually put them on target a lot of the time. And, then there was the next day another battery of these rockets that were supposed to go off and that ended up killing a bunch of Iraqi policemen who showed up trying to disarm them. In Baghdad, most of these guys are Shiites too. I really feel that, this is a very nice point, that these Iranian-made rockets that are coming in, and they're not a huge threat to the coalition. They are a huge threat to the people that supposedly Iran claims it's trying to support.
Now, I guess when I look at this delegation going out and the recent events in Basra, I see actually a little bit of muscle flexing by the Maliki government. Is that how you take this, Bill?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Look, the reporting at the beginning of this was that within 2 days the media was calling this an absolute failure of the Iraqi government and the Iraqi military. But in actuality, what happened was that about almost 7,000 troops, almost a division of Iraqi troops, were elite Iraqi troops too, special forces elements from the 1st Division. It's best, in my opinion, by far the best Iraqi army division, were sent down, almost a whole brigade from there. A SWAT from, I believe it was from Hilla, which is one of the elite Iraqi police units. They were sent down the day that deployment finished in 6 days after the fighting started. When that deployment hit, Sadr declares a ceasefire, and he demands that the Iraqi government halt its operations. The Iraqi government ignored him and kept going and began clearing neighborhoods, and this is still ongoing to this day, clearing Sadr-controlled neighborhoods. And we keep getting told that they failed, but the Iraqi government is not buying the media line, because they understand what's happening in Basra. And, they've recognized how Iran has actually tried to undermine the Iraqi regime itself by supporting militias, by the Mahdi army and elements of it called the special groups, arming them with EFPs and rockets that have assassinated governors and police chiefs and senior army officers and representatives of Ali al-Sistani, the Grand Ayatollah, the most senior Shia cleric in Iraq, and arguably in the Shia world. So I definitely believe that Iraq is flexing some muscle here, and this works to the advantage of Iraq, and it works to the advantage of the United States as well.
Now, Grim, what's your impression as far as the Iraqi forces' usefulness and effectiveness in standing on their own? I mean, obviously that is the entire goal, is to put them in charge, and they've had some recent success with what I think we could call confidence targets. But Basra may have been the first time they went head-to-head with some folks who may have made, in the style that the militias do, a concerted stance. But do you think they're stepping up to the plate and in many cases capable of operating more or less independently?
You're definitely, without question, they're getting better. During the Arbaeen pilgrimage, there were numbers varied. I've seen as low as 6 million, which is not all that low, and as high as 9 million pilgrims moving across Iraq, mostly on foot. There was one attack in Iskandaria that the Iraqi security forces didn't manage to stop. It killed about 40, 60 people, something like that. But otherwise, it was a peaceful pilgrimage that lasted, a fair length of time, a week or two. And this was an ISF-led enterprise as well. And, it's one that occupied hundreds of square miles from Al-Qut to Najaf and Karbala, and, millions of people. And this was not something that we did a lot with. This was an Iraqi security force thing. You're seeing them starting to do division-level operations, not just in Basra. There's one in Yusufia or in the Yusufia-Mahmudiyya area right now. The improvement that we've seen in the ISF over the last year is undeniable.
Well, now, I guess we got, just to switch the topic, but we did get some good news on the dead tangos front, Bill. Could you fill us in a little bit about what happened in Somalia?
Sure, yes. I'm just going to take a real brief. I concur with Grim's assessment of the Iraqi military as well. The gentleman, DJ Elliott, he tracks this. We look at those operations, and I could not agree with more. At the risk of being an echo chamber here, his assessment is spot on. On the dead tango issue, we had a successful airstrike in northern Somalia today. They took out a man named Aiden Hashi Oro. He was trained in Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, a leader of a violent subgroup of the Islamic Courts Union called Al-Shabaab. It's basically the youth movement of that organization, and has been responsible for attacks on Somali transition government forces and Ethiopian forces all through, and attacking civilians as well. Looks like they tagged him. The U.S. Special Forces have figured out where he was. Another senior commander that there's not a lot of information out there on was killed in this attack. This was, and I know the papers right now are saying supposedly killed, but he's definitely dead. When the Islamic courts or when Al-Qaeda comes out and says this person's dead, they're dead. Is highly significant. I placed him number 3 on the Al-Qaeda / Islamic courts leaders that I would like to see taken down in Somalia. The first one being Hassan Dahir Owais, who is the leader of the Islamic courts, is also an senior Al-Qaeda operative. He's basically Al-Qaeda's commander in Somalia. Then there's Fazul Muhammad, one of the senior operational planner of Al-Qaeda's attacks on the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. And then Oyo was definitely number 3 on my list as the leader of Shabaab. That is the violent, within the Islamic courts, you're going to get, you're going to have these guys, just like you have it in the Iraqi insurgency, where you have your moderate jihadis, so to speak. But these guys were the real deal, the real believers. They're indoctrinating the youth to violent activities as well as training people for suicide attacks. So he definitely a very big kill there.
And it seems that it was information from local folks there that affected this, and that may have come about due to a backlash against the violent tactics he was employing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of money was thrown at this as well. I would not be surprised to hear that there's some payoffs coming on for this. The money certainly goes far in that part of the world. A little bit of money will go a long way. There's no doubt that the Islamic courts and Shabab have been, are espousing the Taliban-like rule in Eastern Africa. They've shut down theaters, they've banned sporting events, they want to cover up the women, they've stopped them from chewing the khat, which is a mild narcotic, and smoking cigarettes. The Somali people are, by nature of, practice a moderate brand of Islam, and most of them don't want this.
Well, now, Grim, that brings up the point that obviously we're fighting a global enemy. We're fighting an insurgent force that pops its head up any place there's a security vacuum and enough Muslims to create a critical mass. What are some other places around the globe you think we ought to be focusing on?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that concept, because I think it's an important one. In terms of Somalia, the reason the Islamic courts originally became powerful and influential is because of the security vacuum. As you said, there's a lot of factionalism going along, and they were trying to do something, the initial supporters of this, that isn't in and of itself a bad thing, which is that they were trying to address the security vacuum by using Islam as a unifying factor to get people past the factionalism, the tribalism, and whatnot. The problem is that the factionalism is a very strong influence on people's behavior, and so the Islamic courts, which initially were not as radical as they later became, as Taliban-like as they later became, started cracking down more and more, forcing these Islamic notions, not Islamic, but the Al-Qaeda style, Taliban style radical notions, as a way of trying to force people into this mold. And it's a total failure. That system doesn't work. What we see is that we've got a very similar problem in Iraq with the Sunni, the Shiites, and all these other groups. What is needed is a system that allows for people's differences and provides a security guarantee, which is why the U.S. forces are able to do things like a Sons of Iraq movement, where we can make them work with a government they started out being hostile to, but they know that we will provide a certain level of promise that they will be treated fairly, and that allows them to do things like turn in heavy weapons and start acting in cooperation. Eventually, you can pursue reconciliation.
Well, now, do you think it's vital that we engage whatever government happens to be in a country like Somalia, even if they're part of the problem, and try to co-opt them by showing that our intentions are good? A lot of times information gets filtered, and the people of a country like Somalia have no idea what U.S. intentions actually are. They get whatever information is put out in the local mosque, more or less. So do you think it's worthwhile to engage the government and try to work the way and get the information flowing down to the people?
I would have to say that was a case-by-case thing. There are times when we have the power to do more, and we can achieve better results in other ways. There are also times and places in which we really don't have, at the moment, the attention or the forces or the resources to spare for anything else. So we have to make the decision about how to move forward in a given area based on its particular concerns and what we have available to us at the moment.
Well, now, Bill, what's your impression then of the overall efforts we've made in the Horn of Africa? Obviously, AFRICOM is an interesting command unto itself, and there's an awful lot of special operations activity going on there that is, in many ways, counterinsurgency focused. What do you think about the region as a whole?
Well, just two quick points before I address that. Grim made an excellent point. You definitely have to take this on a case-by-case basis. We cannot have a one-size-fit-all solution to this. The second point I would like to make is that I do disagree about the Islamic courts being a moderate group. It sprung out from a group called Ittihad al-Islamiyya, which was a violent al-Qaeda-linked group that was behind the Black Hawk Down incident. So, and this is a case of where, had we have dealt with a government, which the Islamic courts were in charge of Somalia throughout most of 2007, we definitely have to pick and choose here. But as far as our counterinsurgency efforts go in Eastern Africa, I think we've really failed the Somali people. We failed to fund the transitional federal government, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars could pay their security forces, get them trained up. But unfortunately, seem to have acceded to the European Union's demands that they negotiate with the Islamic courts. So we have these false negotiations going on, and in the meantime, we have a security vacuum there. U.S. efforts in places like Djibouti and in Ethiopia, we're working to train up their security forces, very important. We're also doing a lot of humanitarian outreach missions in the Eastern African regions, sinking wells, developing schools, things that, local, micro projects at the very local level that improves people's lives and gives them hope, and also gives a good impression of the U.S. To me, there's no better ambassador for the U.S. than the U.S. soldier going out and helping the local people. But, I would say, as a whole, our counterinsurgency efforts, particularly in Somalia, have been a failure because we have refused to engage. Yes, the airstrike that killed RO was definitely, is definitely a good thing, but killing individual leaders is not. Same problem as Pakistan, right? We can kill these individual Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders all we want, but the organizations that exist are still going to be there. And it's a good thing to kill these senior leaders because they have a lot of trust within the organization. They have a lot of clout. They have a lot of contacts. They're able to raise money. But eventually, new people, if you do not go in there and put boots on the ground in one way or another, whether it's the local forces, whether it's supporting the Ethiopian forces, which we're doing to some degree in Somalia, or whether it's doing that like the Sons of Iraq type movement, which really needed U.S. forces on the ground to succeed. If we're not taking this to the next level, killing individual commanders is not in itself the solution.
Now let me jump back to Iraq. There's an excellent piece up today. The Small Wars Journal has put together a new version of their magazine, and there's a couple pieces available online. One entitled "Non-Lethal Contributions to the Counterinsurgency" that I think is an excellent look at the transition from kinetic operations, to full-fledged counterinsurgency by Captain Justin Gorkowski. So I would recommend anybody who wants to know about the challenge facing us right now. That's a good look at what's going on in Iraq. Now, Grim, you were just back from there. How do you see the transition from the kinetic battle to counterinsurgency? How do you see that going on?
The most important aspect to this is that once the security situation gets good enough, and you can start to kick off the economics. The economics have a powerful stabilizing force, not just because they give people jobs, which of course is important. A lot of the early Iraqi insurgency was basically because these are folks who had money to pay you and you had to eat. And, so if they said, well, we're only willing to pay you to go plant bombs on the road, there weren't a lot of options. But more than that, the economic improvements give people a stake in stability. So they reinforce the security system as well. Even with criminal organizations such as parts of the satirist groups that are trying to run protection rackets and whatnot, but they really want also to provide protection, not just to take out a certain amount of money from the flow, because they get to be dependent upon that money. So they end up, even though they are criminals, even though they are groups that we eventually hope to dismantle, in the short term, you end up seeing a positive out of them because they begin to start contributing to the security, to the stability of the central government of the state as a whole. And that gives you the groundwork to, once you have then solidified that, you can start cracking down on the criminal organizations. But it's a transition from the sort of Wild West period we had in 2006 to what we hope to have in a couple of years, where you actually have a stable state based on the rule of law. It's a transitional state. And the non-kinetic things that we do, providing water for irrigation, providing power for industry, providing security on the highways just so that they can transport their goods back and forth, these are things that are tremendously important to bringing us out of war and into peace, and that sort of nebulous zone between war and peace that you get with insurgencies.
It is nebulous, that's a fact. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk here. It's an ongoing thing, I think, an education process where the more we can tell people what counterinsurgency actually is and what kind of a battle we're fighting globally, I think we do everyone a service that has not been done by either the administration or the media. So I appreciate your time. This is Bill Roggio, who publishes the Long War Journal at longwarjournal.org, which is one of the best places to find out just about everything that's going on bad around the world, unfortunately. And also Grim, who is the brains of our operation here at Blackfive. Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, Jimbo.
Anytime, Jim.